Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 11 of GT Masters, the review series for, as the name suggests, Gran Turismo's GT class race cars from a variety of different racing series, designed for a variety of different circuits, and of course based on a variety of different cars. And in this particular episode we're featuring a racing version of one of the most prolific cars on Gran Turismo. I believe it's actually the most prolific car of the Gran Turismo series, the Skyline. More specifically, the GT-R, because it spans everything from way back in the day, right up to the R35, which of course isn't even called the Skyline anymore. There are hundreds of Skylines and GT-Rs on Gran Turismo, including racing versions. And it's almost become a cliche at this point how many of them there are. Do we need that many? Of course not. You could easily have, say, 20, and you'd have more than enough. But there's nothing we can do to change that at the moment. So, let's consider what we have. This car in particular is the Falken Racing GT-R. And there are a number of things that make the car pretty unique. One is the look. Now, I personally love the Falken colours. I think it's a fantastic livery. It stands out from the crowd. The colours go brilliantly together. And it gives it, naturally, a look of a drift car, because Falken, of course, has quite a heavy presence also in drifting as well as racing. More so, in fact. So that's one thing. There's also the style of the car, though. It's much closer, if you actually study the way the car is shaped, to a production vehicle. It doesn't have that massive, crazy, wide body kit that many GTs have, such as, for instance, the Shoals Racing or Team RJN GT-Rs, which have those big pumped-up body kits. Now, as cool as that looks, it gives you the inherent problem, which I have mentioned before on the channel, of the car being too big. The car doesn't necessarily need to also be heavy for that to be a disadvantage, because even if a car is lightweight but still huge, you're naturally filling up most of the road, so it's much harder to maintain a decent racing line. It's also harder to overtake people. So the fact that this GT-R is more restrained as far as having a body kit is actually not a bad thing. You do have a slight disadvantage of not having the wider track, which typically gives you more stability, but the payoff is that it is more nimble and narrower than many other GTs, which is a big advantage on twisty circuits. Another advantage is the fact that this is actually one of the very, very few GT class machines to have all-wheel drive. And although all-wheel drive does have the natural downside, in the case of most all-wheel drive cars, of that slight bit of understeer, which can be tuned and improved on, but it's always there, it gives you some very distinct and very beneficial advantages over typical rear-wheel drive GTs. Most notably, one is launch, and two is all-weather ability. If you're driving in the rain, the fact is an all-wheel drive car is always going to have more traction than a rear-wheel drive car in that situation. So that is definitely to be noted. If you are planning to do rain racing on Gran Turismo, which is a popular category, you definitely want to keep this car in mind, because it has that all-wheel drive advantage. But also, the launch, as I mentioned, it doesn't have NOS, but still, all-wheel drive can help you to launch off the line quicker than a rear-wheel drive car, which could typically, especially fully tuned, be more inclined towards wheel spin. Now, in terms of top-end performance, it's not the strongest of GTs. It's certainly not bad. You can get it up to around 220, 230, so good enough for most tracks. But it's not the strongest of them, and that is to be noted. It's powered by a 2.8 litre engine, so a little bit bigger than a standard R34. And it puts out, when fully tuned, 856 horsepower and 675 foot-pounds of torque. So not quite as powerful as the road-going R34, but still more than enough for most tracks. It also doesn't weigh that much, which is impressive for an all-wheel drive vehicle, at 1,237 kilos. So not the lightest of GTs, but far from being the heaviest either. The fact that it doesn't have all that much weight, and it does have a decent power output, also means that this car puts out 692 horsepower per tonne, which is pretty good. especially for a more almost road-esque racing car, being visually and mechanically closer to the road car than it is to some of the crazy GT3 or GT1 class machines. As far as PP, it sits at spot on 650 fully tuned, which is pretty good if you're tuning it for 650 because it's naturally there. I wouldn't necessarily recommend racing it at 650. Some cars are very good at their maximum PP. I wouldn't say this is one of them. I wouldn't really recommend taking this car any higher than maybe 600 PP. Any higher than that and you can get some pretty amazing cars. And as good as this car is, it's not amazingly good. It's just good. So anything up to 600 PP and the advantages that this car gives you can be used really well. Above that, well, you're starting to get into Tommy Kyra territory, into prototype territory, and this car's advantages start to become kind of irrelevant against those kind of vehicles. Now, the biggest advantage I would say to the Falken GT-R is the price. More specifically, the value. Most GT class cars of anywhere near this car's kind of ability would cost you at least, say, 1 million credits, if not more. This car costs 200,000 credits. That is ridiculously cheap for a GT class machine, especially one as good as this car. I would say it's at least worth 750,000, which is the price of a GT6 Skyline, because it's at least as good as those cars, and in some cases better. So this car is definitely worth considering. But that's it overall for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.